Hello lovelies. Today we're going to be taking a moderately deep dive into the idea of learning through play. Even though a game, or in fact anything else, being explicitly educational is typically the death knell of anyone being remotely interested in it, so this is a bit of a risky enterprise. Think of this then as a descriptive journey through the idea of tabletop role-playing games as a thing that can be educational as well as fun. I mean, certain aspects of this are obvious. Games act to gamify maths, English, some history perhaps, and some other skills. But we're going to go a bit beyond that. We're going to talk about how they're powerful informal learning tools and how they do gamify lifelong learning and personal growth, as people call it. Whether you're a games master, a player, a teacher, a therapist, or a curious observer, there is a lot more going under the hood than most folks seem to realise. Quite a few members of my family have been teachers. Same with my friends, and with friends of the family. Teachers tend to flock together, it would seem. So I've heard the teaching perspective a lot. Similarly, I've known a lot of counsellors and therapists on my various meandering journeys through the mental health care system. And I've heard their perspective too, because obviously, it comes up in my actual explicit therapy and counselling sessions. Particularly the deleterious mental health effect of having people turn on you. We recently had a great conversation about this aspect of things over on T-Shirted Historians channel on the Dungeons and Discussions series. Finally, I have been a full-time game designer for 20 years and a part-time one for about 25 years and an informal hobbyist for longer than that, with all of the play and design experience that goes along with all of that. The role of RPGs as potentially therapeutic, or if we're going to avoid that term, as we probably should, at least cathartic and as educational, yet that whole conceit is something that is often on my mind. You sit down for a session expecting maybe the usual dungeoneering, monster slaying, political intrigue, maybe a bit of humorous chaos. And sure, all of that happens, certainly. But lurking beneath every scene, every encounter, are lessons, subtle, sticky, and stealthy. You might think you're just rolling dice and having a laugh, but you're actually practicing empathy, simulating moral dilemmas, sharpening social instincts, engaging in risk assessment, mathematics, creativity, and maybe even picking up the names and shapes of a score of medieval polearms, information you're unlikely to need in your day-to-day life. But RPGs sneak that education in, whether by design or by accident. In contrast to formal teaching, lectures, textbooks, standard curricula, RPGs package learning inside meaningful choices, embodied in context and with stakes and meaning. And because you're emotionally invested in your character, those lessons tend to stick. You're motivated to think them through. As a games master or a designer, if you're thoughtful, you can treat your narrative a bit like a workshop. Every scene, every encounter can become a moment of potential growth, offering emotional intelligence, moral reasoning, and social adaptability, all without resorting to didactic storytelling. This almost happens without us intending it to, because these are the sorts of things that offer interesting and engaging stories and outcomes. So even without trying, we often create these kind of situations in our games. It's also more engaging because, unlike a PSA at the end of a G.I. Joe episode or an overarching morality tale like you'd find in Star Trek, what the lesson or learning opportunity actually is depends far more on the players and what they do. But let's examine how that happens. Emotional intelligence doesn't require a therapy couch. It can happen right at your gaming table. Every conversation, every conflict, every moment where a player makes a choice helps deepen their emotional acuity, For instance, imagine someone playing a pacifist character in a brutal battlefield-oriented session. That character must choose restraint even as their instincts, and probably their player impulses, crave violence. The inner conflict becomes an emotional exploration in real time. They feel frustration, they feel moral pressure. How important is it for them to stick to their vow of pacifism compared to more immediate choices? Are they causing more suffering and evil by being pacifistic than they would by intervening? So they feel that moral pressure, they experience emotional friction, and the reflections that creates internally can later inform us in our actual lives in unexpected ways, because we have considered these points in a fictional frame. Now, I don't really believe in bleed, or that people confuse fantasy with reality, but powerful narratives and big questions in all sorts of media can inform our future decision making in our real lives and provide models to follow, heroes to elevate, villains to hate. Just as a flight simulator can prepare someone to pilot a real plane, so the moral decisions that we make in our games, ethical decisions, practical decisions, can inform our real lives. Consider grief. Your party loses a beloved NPC retainer, and suddenly the table collectively feels it. Characters may even shed a tear, share memories, apologize to each other for the decisions that led to the death of that NPC, or decide that, hang going to kill the Dark Lord, we need to change our quest to find a way of resurrecting Grimble-Gulk the Goblin, who has been carrying water skins for us for the past 6 sessions. And players may do the same, questioning their out-of-character decisions that led to this in-character event. That grief portrayed through the characters teaches players something about empathy and loss, but without the associated real-world risk. You can explore deep emotions in a controlled environment, the same way maybe you cry at the end of an impactful movie, the way a chick flick is used for catharsis. Players ask, what does my character feel, and in that space begin to ask themselves the same sort of questions. And that's a form of emotional learning in action. That's also why I think that RPGs are so useful to people with social issues or autism spectrum disorders. They provide a controlled environment with rules and structure, a place where they can step into a social space and have some sort of grasp on what is supposed to happen and how, and follow the rules. And it gives you an opportunity to ponder and practice trying to read people, the other players, the NPCs, everything else, and to react in the way that they do. And then there's moral reasoning, often the most gripping lessons and sessions that RPGs can deliver. Within these make-believe worlds, players routinely face tough ethical choices. Will you slay the goblin tribe to save a different halfling tribe? Will you steal from the noble or collect the taxes that he is genuinely owed? Will you torture a captive for information or potentially allow an enemy to run rampant because you haven't managed to get that information? Can baby goblins grow up and not be evil? And therefore, is hiding out with a flamethrower in a goblin maternity ward spawn camping? These are important moral and ethical questions, and they take place in worlds that may not even share basic things with ours, like the existence of real, true, absolute evil can be a thing in a fantasy world. The act of choosing, defending that choice, justifying that choice, and living with its outcome is a powerful moral exercise. In fact, this is the core gameplay loop in my own game, Actual Fucking Monsters. Instead of enter a dungeon, get treasure, buy better gear and training so you can tackle a bigger dungeon. In actual fucking Monsters, it is do something awful because you have to, because you're a goddamn monster. This creates consequences. The consequences catch up to you. You probably do something else awful to try and escape those consequences, which creates new consequences, which eventually catch up to you, and so on. That's explicitly a game for examining morality, ethics, and consequences, and just how far you can push moral relativism. Or you can just view it as an excuse to engage in an orgy of violence as a powerful monster. It's up to you. When you let the villagers go only to discover that they were spies, when you trust a shady necromancer hoping the ends justify the means, and so on, you experience moral grey areas firsthand, simulated. Just because a system is light on mechanics doesn't mean it's void of ethical exposition and expression. Even group votes about party actions encourage consensus building, collective responsibility, arguing for your point of view, and moral accountability. Over time, players develop a personal moral compass for their characters and help develop their own moral compass. Not because someone told them to, but because they lived it through play in intense situations that are rarely encountered in real life. They test the boundaries of right and wrong, weigh outcomes, and refine their own sense of morality. That's moral growth cultivated session by session. And sure, you might never have to betray a witch who trusted you, but you might be told something criminal in confidence and have to decide what to do about that. And that's a similar enough situation to one that you'll have run into at the table that you've already strained that brain muscle trying to understand what to do. RPGs are social, so much so that they function like microcosms of real-world group dynamics. Playing a tabletop RPG isn't a solo affair, typically. It's a team effort. You learn to take your turn, so everyone else can shine as well. You learn to compromise, to synergize, to negotiate, to build consensus. Even if your character is chaotic evil, you still need party cohesion to survive and succeed, otherwise the game falls apart. And to this point, a lot of companies are now using paid-for tabletop RPG sessions in order to teach people how to cooperate. Team building exercises, the way they used to pack everyone off to paintball or whatever. Conflict inevitably arises in games. Maybe two players each want to go a different direction in the dungeon. Maybe one character disrespects another. Rather than shutting down, RPGs teach you to navigate that conflict in character, or in short out-of-character discussions. You learn negotiation skills, you learn group psychology and team dynamics by osmosis, by experiencing it. You learn to collaborate even when opinions differ, because that's how a game stays fun and functional. And along the way, your communication skills sharpen. You learn to read tone and balance multiple agendas. And all of this happens organically. No specialist workshops are needed, no qualified therapists are necessary. Perhaps most importantly in this day and age, you might share the gaming table and the group vision quest that it creates with people who in their real life are very different to you, with different political and social ideals and ideas. Playing together helps you humanize each other and helps you live alongside each other away from the table. What makes RPGs educationally potent is their universality across different learning styles. Visual learners might latch onto maps, character art, handouts and diagrams. Auditory learners thrive on dialogue, narration and sound cues. Kinesthetic learners revel in the haptics of dice rolling, miniatures, tactile props and even costumes. Great sessions can combine all of these elements into one mutually reinforcing experience, which then reinforces concepts across these various modalities. You don't have to be aware of your own learning style. The game comes out and meets you where you are and teaches you naturally through engagement. And because you're having fun, the learning doesn't feel like learning, it's just play. So maybe don't tell anyone it's educational. That might ruin it. Believe it or not, educators and therapists are already using RPGs for real-world teaching and healing. Creative writing instructors assign one-shot games to teach narrative structure and character arcs, and adopting the point of view of a particular character. History teachers recreate historical eras or conflicts to immerse students in context, or run mock trials to teach broader critical thinking skills. In therapy circles, game aids like Critical Core or group roleplay sessions can help with trauma recovery, social anxiety, and create coping skills. Even crunchy dungeon crawls teach risk management, resource conservation, and strategy planning. I am wary though, very, very wary of using RPGs as explicit therapy, or of treating an ordinary RPG session, at least, as explicit therapy. But like any other hobby or pastime, I think they can be a much needed escape and a safe zone from the slings and arrows of real life. Still, some are using them in this therapeutic milieu, and I think that's okay. I just don't think you should treat your regular games master or the other regular players as somehow responsible for your mental health or helping you with it. At best, they're providing you with an escape, and at absolute best, you might learn and take something from it. But what's brilliant about all of these things is that none of it feels like school or an intervention. Instead, playing a game is immersive, experiential, and memorable. Players don't just sit still and take notes, they act, they reflect, they adjust, and that's the power of the RPG as a teaching tool. But yeah, there's danger here too, gamifying morality where empathy becomes just another checkbox on a character sheet or a score metric could well cheapen the experience or take you out of it. We already have far too many game companies trying to enforce or propagandize their politics through their games and their community curation. Trying to enforce their moral and ethical schema onto others seems like it could be even more contentious than the political stuff. One key ingredient to learning is reflection, time to absorb and take in, and RPGs encourage that by nature. After a pivotal scene, players might ask each other, why did your character react that way? What surprised you about your decision? Did the consequences surprise you emotionally? That post-session debrief, put far less formally and jargon-filled than that, can turn the immediate experience into a longer-term insight. It's like performing a play and then thinking back about what made that performance better or worse, or what made it matter. We have our informal feedback processes, and it's not normally as stark as I've expressed it here, but it is a thing, even if they just become stories. And campaigns amplify this. You enter the first session unaccustomed to anything, but by session 8 or 10 you're noticing patterns in your character, yourself, and in the system, emotional triggers, moral footprints, communication habits. You see yourself, and sometimes you like what you see, sometimes you change what you see, sometimes you surprise yourself. It's real-time growth with an archive of moments to look back on that often become stupid gamer stories. So if you're someone who maps worlds, writes rules, or leads sessions for others, you can think of yourself as an emotional architect to some degree, but not too much. Balancing encounters is one thing, designing moments that require characters and players to confront feelings, not just roll for attacks, is something else. Give them questions, not just challenges. Provide structured reflection time. Even a 2-minute break for soft roleplay can prompt meaningful discussion, as can stopping the game altogether for a group meal or a smoke break. You can use mechanics to highlight emotional beats. When you gain a level, declare one fear your character has overcome, but I tend to think emotions shouldn't be mechanical. It always, to me at least, ends up feeling reductive and distancing the player from the character, so I hate it when you start seeing feelings on a character sheet. Still, you can shape your narrative context so that emotional arcs, not just loop progression, are visible. And genre matters. A gritty drama type game tolerates less absurdity. A comedic game tolerates more meta play. Match mood to mechanism. So, in many ways, RPGs are stealth classrooms and empathy engines, as Mark Reinhagen puts it. They're messy, unpredictable, and so gloriously deeply human. Through emotional play, moral choices, and social negotiation, players can become more mindful, more empathetic, more reflective, more literate and practiced through the moral and ethical simulator of the game. They don't need to know it, they just do it naturally. But when you know it's there, maybe you can do more with it. So here's my challenge to you. In your next session, try and notice and capture a moment of growth, a moment of moral and ethical struggle that the group has. Maybe a character shows vulnerability and is accepted for it or rejected for it. Maybe a group solves conflict with diplomacy when violence would have been the normal go-to. Maybe they experience regret in character, and that's an insight you can apply out of game. But notice it, draw it out, write it down, and if that's something you like, you can build a culture of reflection around your table. Because every time you gather, you're not just spinning a tale, you are shaping people. And that's the real magic of the pedagogy of play. Thanks for spending this time with me. If you have witnessed or had emotional or moral growth at your table, or had a very affecting scene or adventure or encounter or storyline, drop your stories about those in the comments for me. Let's keep the conversation going and evidence my thesis. Zang.